James Patrick McGovern, a child of Massachusetts, born and raised in Worcester, Massachusetts, grew up in the home that he, right around the corner from where he lives now. Attended schools in Worcester, first at Burncott and then at Worcester Academy. And like many of us in this group and our viewers, developed an interest in politics at a very young age. And in the 7th grade, volunteered on the presidential campaign of Senator George McGovern, no relation. He knocked on doors and joined the anti-war movement. In 1984, he actually managed Senator McGovern's second presidential campaign here in Massachusetts. He went off to college in Washington, D.C., where he earned a bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree in public administration. He then worked for Congressman Joseph Moakley of Massachusetts from 1992 till 1996, serving as his chief assistant, press secretary, and legislative director. In 1989, Congressman Moakley asked Jim to be the lead staffer in the investigation of the murders of 6 Jesuit priests, their housekeeper, and their daughter in El Salvador. He exposed that the murders were committed by the U.S.-backed Salvadoran military, leading to a major shift in U.S. foreign policy. After Jim's discovery, future military aid from the United States was contingent on improved human rights and a negotiated peace in El Salvador. Jim McGovern was elected in his own right to the United States House of Representatives in 1996. In 2001, he was appointed to a seat on the powerful Rules Committee, which sets terms for debate on most legislation. During his time in Congress, his top priority has always been his constituents back home. He has been an advocate for making college more affordable and authored a bill to increase Pell Grant funding. He's worked to protect open space and enhance recreational community spaces in urban and suburban neighborhoods. He successfully fought to defend the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which provides grants to preserve open space. He has authored legislation to give tax credits to employers who pay the salaries of National Guard members and reservists called to active duty. He is co-chair of the bipartisan Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, which investigates international human rights abuses and recommends how the United States should foster respect for democratic values abroad. In this role, he has held a spotlight to egregious international human rights violations. One of the Congressman's greatest passions is ending hunger at home and abroad. He is founder and co-chair of the House Hunger Caucus and ranking member of the House Subcommittee on Nutrition, where he advocates tirelessly for funding programs that help working families, children, and the elderly put food on their table when times are tough. And he also authored the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program to provide school-based meals for millions of children in some of the world's poorest areas. United States Congressman Jim McGovern now joins us here on Flap TV for the next half hour to talk about his work in Washington on behalf of the people of the 2nd Congressional District. Thank you, Congressman.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Great to have you. And we talked about in the intro your passion around fighting hunger in the United States and really drawing attention to that. And a lot of people say politicians talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. I heard you walked quite the walk while the rest of us were eating turkey on Thanksgiving.
Well, I do this annual walk with this guy named Monty Belmonte, who hosts a radio show in Northampton, and we walk 43 miles from Springfield to Northampton to Greenfield. And we do it, we raise awareness about hunger in our community. There's not a single city or town in the United States of America that's hunger-free. And we raise money. We raised $260,000 for the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. And I believe that hunger is a political condition. I mean, we have the food, we have the resources, we have everything to end it but the political will. And I think here in the United States of America, the richest country in the history of the world, there are still 42 million Americans who are food insecure or hungry, and I think that's shameful, and we ought to do something about it.
And that's really the conflicting point about this also is you look at some of other countries that traditionally we know that have, famine.
Right.
And it's because of lack of food. We don't have lack of food. No. We have plenty of food here. Right. It's a poverty issue here.
Right. It is a poverty issue here, and you talk to school teachers in Leominster or Fitchburg or Worcester, wherever, and they'll tell you that there are kids who show up to school who are hungry. And thank God for the school, lunch programs and the summer feeding programs. And we have senior citizens who are hungry. I mean, there's been a rise in senior hunger. There are people who are workers, who work, who are hungry. Sometimes I get criticized for being a defender of the SNAP program, which used to be known as food stamps. And people say, well, everybody just ought to go to work. And what I remind people is that the majority of people on SNAP are children, they're senior citizens, or they're disabled. Of those who can work, the vast majority work, but they earn so little, they still qualify for SNAP. So, maybe we ought to be talking about how we improve wages. I mean, people are working, but they're still earning so little that they require this benefit. And I think food ought to be considered a fundamental right for everybody. There are some things you can live without, but food is not one of them. And we ought to be able to do better here in this country. We have great, this great abundance of food. We have incredible farmers right here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We ought to support them, but we ought to make sure that every single person has enough to eat.
Very good, and that's and tying income inequality to the hunger issue.
Right.
Is that the key here?
I think that's a big part of the key. The reason why people are hungry is because they can't afford to buy food. They don't have access to food. We have these things called food deserts. But I remember one time I was at the Worcester County Food Bank, and I walked in to do an event, but I noticed there was a guy in his car right next to where I got out, and I kind of nodded. I went in, I did my event, I came out, and he was still there. And so I knocked on the window. I said, how you doing? I'm Jim McGovern, and he said, nice to see you. And I said, well, what are you here for? And he says, well, I'm here to get food. And he says, and I'm just kind of embarrassed to go in and ask. He says, I work, but I'm not making enough, and I could barely pay our rent, and but we don't have enough to eat, and so I'm coming here looking for food. And when you see this, it breaks your heart. When you see kids who are hungry, it breaks your heart, and it just doesn't have to be. And I'm always amazed that in Washington we get all worked up about tax cuts and and this or that, and yet we can't seem to get that worked up about the fact that there were so many of our fellow Americans who are hungry. And by the way, it costs a lot to have so many people hungry. People who go without eating, I mean, their immune systems are compromised. Or people who are eating junk food all the time end up with all kinds of ailments that are costly. Kids who go to school hungry can't learn. Workers aren't productive who go to work hungry. Senior citizens, who take their medicine on an empty stomach when it says take with a meal because they can't afford their prescriptions or meals, end up in an emergency room. So we just have to do better, and I'm in Congress trying to persuade my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, to fight harder on this issue.
So what does it say about us and a government and our society when the United States has both a hunger epidemic and an obesity epidemic?
Yeah, I think this is time for some reflection, and we need to figure out how to do better. Fighting hunger is not just about giving people food for the sake of food. We should be focused on nutritious food because we don't want to solve one problem to create another. And I just, a couple of weeks ago, unveiled this new bipartisan working group that we put together called Food is Medicine. My grandmother used to say to me growing up that an apple a day keeps the doctor away. It used to annoy me, but I wish she was still alive so I could tell her, you're right. We ought to be thinking out of the box. Doctors can give you prescriptions for medications that are very, very expensive, but sometimes it's your diet that is more important than the medication. So, we ought to have doctors be able to give out food prescriptions, for example. We ought to make sure that the food we give our kids, not just in schools, but wherever, is nutritious. And we need to, help people appreciate how to cook. Cooking in my kind of generation is, you go to the supermarket, you buy a chicken that's already been cooked and it's filled with preservatives, you put it in the microwave, you nuke it for 5 minutes, and there it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's convenient, but it's not necessarily the best for you. A friend of mine who's a chef, who's from Spain, who just became an American citizen, a guy named Jose Andres, always says to me, he says, the trouble is, he says, in the old days, recipes would be passed down from one generation to another. He says, a lot of the younger generation now, don't take those recipes, they don't cook. We need to get back to that. It's cheaper and it's better for you. And so, as we fight hunger, we need to keep our focus on nutrition as well.
I'm as guilty as the next guy on that. Given a choice between a Snickers bar and an apple, I'll always take the
all
Snickers
of it.
bar.
Me too. What I think I've learned is it's hard to change habits as you get older. Getting to our kids early on, kind of integrating nutrition in our curriculum, making sure they understand the importance of the food that they eat in the cafeteria, that establishes good, healthy habits that will stay with them for the rest of their life.
Yeah. I notice too, a lot of it is just corporations using the cheapest ingredients they can and the worst ingredients to increase their profit margins.
It is. I mean, a lot of that is, and sometimes I think you need a PhD in chemistry to be able to figure out what the ingredients are, on whatever you buy. And the labeling is all misleading. That's the other thing that is infuriating. People think they're buying something good when it says, 20% less sodium. Then what?
Right.
Than the Dead Sea? I mean, what? And all these, or they think natural, means, non-GMO, or, natural means nothing, or that natural means good for you. I guess the Webster's definition is probably good. Right, but the people are putting on their labels things that are deceiving people into buying their product thinking that it's something that it's not.
Yeah, one of the things I notice, I vacation in Italy often, and every time I've gone, I eat more than I eat at home,
right.
And I come back losing weight. They have much stricter regulations in terms of...
They do. The quality of food, see, we in this country, for some reason or another, have put a premium on quantity rather than quality. People in Italy, and they don't go to these, Sam's Clubs or whatever, and buy, food for the next 2 years. I mean, they shop on a regular basis. It's fresh. It's all fresh ingredients, and they cook. It's not pre-cooked. They cook, and so that approach, results in a healthier diet, and I think we're beginning to evolve, and that's all good. We see a proliferation of farmers markets. People want to buy local more than they ever did before. That's all good. Supports our local farmers. I'm on the agriculture committee. I love our farmers. We need to support our local farmers. But we're beginning to move in a better direction.
That's great. Speaking of traveling, I know you took a recent trip with Senator Warren, Congressman Neal, Congressman Kennedy, some other members of the delegation down to Puerto Rico to assess the cleanup efforts from that disaster. And I know we have a large Puerto Rican population in the Leominster-Fitchburg area who have close ties to Puerto Rico. So just hoping you could spend a couple minutes talking about what you saw down there.
It's still devastated, after all these months. Look, I was critical of the Trump administration for what I thought was their inadequate response initially to what happened in Puerto Rico. I don't know what they were thinking, but this is part of our country. I mean, these are our fellow citizens, and yet we dragged our feet. But almost half the island still doesn't have electricity. There are a lot of people who are living in homes without roofs, without even tarps to cover their, where the holes are, or their roofs have been blown off. There's, their electrical grid system has been devastated. Some schools haven't reopened. Some people don't have access to clean water. So we need to understand our commitment to helping Puerto Rico should not be measured in weeks or months. It's going to be years before that island gets back to where it is. In the meantime, some have come to the mainland. Some have come to our communities here. And we need to, welcome them with open arms. I mean, they've been traumatized by this natural disaster. Their homes have been destroyed. The hospitals aren't where they should be in terms of being able to provide the care that people need. So, it's really a sad situation. But I was inspired by the people of Puerto Rico, by their resilience. I was a little nervous when I was reminded that hurricane season begins again in earnest June 1st. And what we're seeing is not just in Puerto Rico, but what hit Texas as well and Florida, these new mega storms that are hitting our country with great intensity. I don't recall these kinds of storms, and I think that is all related to another topic, which is climate change and the fact that we're not we haven't been particularly good stewards of our planet over the years.
It could also be a testament to the organization of government also. I think we saw during Hurricane Katrina really a horrible disaster response. Then we saw with Hurricane Sandy under a different administration where there were appointments made to FEMA that were based on qualifications. We saw rapid response, and now it seems again we're almost regressing back to where politics stands in the way.
Right. I mean, I think the president, unfortunately thought that, this was all about the photo op. And he went down there and tossed paper towels into the crowd, which was really quite offensive.
And then went golfing.
Yeah. And we have this medical ship called the SS Comfort, that is like this incredible hospital that's on this ship that was late being deployed, and that when it was deployed, people weren't having access to the health care available on that ship. I'm a big fan of FEMA. I mean, they're incredible people that work for FEMA, but for whatever reason, our response was inadequate. And and one of the things we're trying to do right now, I'm working with Senator Warren, Senator Markey, and others in our delegation, is that FEMA is limited by law in their mission to what they can rebuild. So they can only rebuild up to where it was. So if you had an inadequate grid, or if you had if this table was wobbly, and then it was destroyed, that FEMA could only rebuild this table to the wobbly state it was in. Well, there's a lot of deferred maintenance in Puerto Rico over the years. So let's not invest all these millions of dollars in, rebuilding bad systems.
And old technology.
Right. And let's use this money better to build systems that can withstand future hurricanes, and that will, be good for the people of the island.
So you're confident you can get this legislation through?
Yeah, I think there's growing awearness that there needs to be more. FEMA needs to have more flexibility.
Seems common sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, if we're going to invest this money, let's rebuild not to where it was, but to where it should be.
And to keep things in perspective, remember the great ice storm up in North Worcester County about 10 years ago. We were out of power for 9 days, and anyone that went through that can remember how much of an impact that can have, not having power for 9 days. Yeah. How long has it been in Puerto Rico now since that hurricane?
Oh, when was it? September? I can't remember.
September, and still half the people are without power?
Right.
That's not acceptable.
And and there's a great deal of frustration because they were promised that by January 1st everybody would have the power they need. And the power that much of the island has right now is generation power. So I mean, they have generators and they have to fill it with diesel fuel, and depending on where you live, it's easy to get diesel fuel. It's not. It's expensive. It adds up. And again, for a lot of people, especially in the rural areas, they're still with nothing. And so we need to keep the people of Puerto Rico in our prayers, and we need to keep the focus of our government on making sure that we help them rebuild.
Excellent. Congressman, we asked members of our group to take this opportunity to ask you questions, speak directly to you through the innovation of social media. So we have a few questions. If we could go to the first question from one of your constituents.
Congressman McGovern, my name is Charlie Milhans. I'm from Leominster, Massachusetts. And first thing is I want to compliment you on your constituent services, which is second to none. And the second is all the service you do for veterans. My questions to you are this. Are you willing to compromise with President Trump on his proposals for a pathway to citizenship for the Dreamers? And the second is, are you willing to compromise with the Republicans on the getting rid of the lottery immigration system and the chain migration in favor of something similar to what Australia and Canada do as far as merit-based immigration policies? Thank you.
First of all, thank you, Charlie, for your question and for complimenting my office for the constituent service. Look, I think compromise is important in government. We all have to give and take. I mean, that's how you get things done. It's not my way or the highway all the time. The problem, I think, that some of us have felt is that for the Republicans, it's been my way or the highway. I think we can come to a bipartisan agreement on immigration, and there'll be some things in that bill that I'm not terribly excited about, and then maybe some things in the bill that the Republicans aren't terribly excited about. But You know, I think, you know, if it can protect the dreamers, if it can establish rational, you know, investments in border control, I'm all for that. The problem with President Trump's approach to this is that, you know, we've met with him and he agreed to one proposal that was a bipartisan proposal at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then at 11 o'clock he disagreed with it. And so I'm not sure we have a reliable negotiator with him. The other thing is, what I'm not willing to give up on is family reunification. I mean, I think families need to stay together. And I think that's an important kind of part of our history and our value system. And yes, I want the smartest people in the world to come here and work here. And so I'm for merit-based immigration. I think that's important. But I'm going to tell you, my great-grandfather came from Poland. He was uneducated, didn't really speak English until the day he died, but he worked, you know, every day of his life. He worked at Holy Cross College in the kitchen, washing dishes, making apple pies. You know, he raised a family, and he gave so much back to this community, and, you know, and I'm here. And on my father's side, you know, his great-grandfather came from Ireland. Again, you know, he wouldn't qualify under any of these merit-based proposals that are being talked about right now. But he came here and he worked every day of his life as well, and, you know, and helped, you know, raise a family and help build our community. So I think we have to make sure we don't get caught up in the rhetoric that somehow, you know, family reunification is bad, or that people who don't have triple PhDs are somehow not valuable. You know, so I'm willing to compromise, but I'm not willing to toss what I think is the best of our immigration system out the window.
Excellent. Let's go to another question from our group.
Hi, Congressman McGovern. I'm curious if you would consider introducing a bill to deschedule marijuana on the federal level, leaving the decision up to the states. I think that you'd have bipartisan support, and it could be a win for the American people. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I support that. I think there may be legislation already introduced. But I've been on a letter to the Attorney General asking him to please respect what the states have done when it comes to marijuana. You know, I mean, you know, I think the Justice Department has far more important and pressing matters to worry about than going after states where their citizens have voted to legalize marijuana or to legalize medical marijuana. And so I agree with you, and we're trying very hard to make sure the federal government does not do anything to impede on states' rights.
Right, and I know you signed onto a letter led by Senator Warren and some other members of the delegation, I believe 54 representatives, to request that the Justice Department back off. But legislatively, Senator Rand Paul is pushing legislation, two pieces of legislation. One that would, by law, let the states do what they want. And the second would reform the banking regulations so that a marijuana dispensary, whether it be medical or recreational, that's running legally would not be in violation of U.S. banking regulations by a transaction.
I would be for both those pieces of legislation. But I think, given the makeup of the House of Representatives right now, I'm not sure that we can get that legislation through. But if it was scheduled for a vote, or, you know, I would certainly, you know, join on and support it.
And Rand Paul is a Republican. So that's a great sign of bipartisanship.
I know Rand Paul, and you know, and I knew his dad too. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on something.
And that's the key, working together when you can.
And there's something you agree on, you ought to come together and get done.
Excellent. We have another question from our group.
Hi, Congressman. Jane Main here from Leominster. Thank you for the work that you're doing in Washington. I know that you put forth a bill to overturn Citizens United and establish a 28th Amendment to get big money out of politics. Can you tell me what's going on locally in Massachusetts in terms of ensuring that that corporations are not treated as people and that big money is not treated as speech? How do we get big money out of politics so that the bills passed and the legislation represents people and not corporations? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, those are great questions. Look, I think money is a corrupting influence of politics, and I can't imagine our founding fathers ever thought that this is the way politics would be conducted. I mean, we have people running for Congress 2-year terms who's raised $27 million to run for Congress. It's crazy. You don't want your elected officials spending all this time raising money, especially from big corporations. You want them to spend time listening to you, going to hearings, doing their work. There's 2 ways to get money out of politics. One is you need a Supreme Court that would respect congressional action to limit that money. Right now we don't have that Supreme Court. They have ruled that some of the stuff that we have proposed is unconstitutional, and they have said that money equals free speech. And the other way is a constitutional amendment. I have 2 constitutional amendments. One that would overturn Citizens United and give Congress the ability to limit what can be spent in campaigns. And the other is a constitutional amendment to make it clear that corporations aren't people. I mean, corporations don't have kids, they don't raise kids, they don't go fight in wars, they're artificial entities created by people. So people have rights. Heads of corporations, people have rights. People who work in corporations have rights. The corporation, the concept should not have rights that trump individuals. And so we're trying to get that on the agenda. It's very tough because the current leadership in Congress likes the system as it is. But we're going to keep on pushing. In the meantime, states are going to hopefully have ballot initiatives that are going to make clear where they come down on this issue. And I hope when these states begin to act on them, they can go to their senators and congresspeople and say, hey, this is what the people of your state want. We don't want more money in politics. We want you to lessen that influence. Get on these bills and pass them.
Probably the last 2 questions kind of tie into each other. When you talk about the makeup of Congress not being willing to, legalize marijuana, well, a lot of that is probably the pharmaceutical industry pouring a lot of money into congressional candidates also.
And one of the reasons why prescription drugs are so high is, I would argue, is because of the impact of money in politics. You know what? We tried to get passed a bill that would allow people on Medicare, that would allow Medicare to negotiate en bulk on behalf of all Medicare beneficiaries with pharmaceuticals to get those drug prices down lower. Big Pharma came in and killed it. I think people should want money out of politics so that their individual voices matter more than some big corporation.
Great. I think we've got time to squeeze in one more.
Hello, my name is Caleb Weldon. I'm a resident of Leominster, Massachusetts, Gateway City in your district. The country is currently facing a skills shortage, especially in terms of medical professionals, skilled tradespeople, and other skilled professionals. This gap is expected to worsen over time. Considering the high cost of education, what can be done to alleviate this problem?
Well, I think what we need to do is we need to expand vocational technical education because I think, I think that's one way to make sure people have the skills. We ought to incentivize companies to provide more apprenticeship programs to help people get the skills that they need. And I'm a big believer in terms of, college. There ought to be more co-ops and, and encouragement for internships, getting those kind of practical skills that will enable you to fill the needs that are out there. But we need to have a better coordination. And I would say, Mount Wachusett, Quinsigamond Community College, a number of others, some of the vocational technical schools, they're already working with a lot of our local companies to try to fill in, to try to make sure that we have, the skill sets and the training that's necessary. But those are some of the things that I would suggest, and that's a very good question.
It is. Congressman, this half hour went by way too fast. I
yeah.
hope you come back another time. We got a lot more questions for you.
No, this is great.
United States Congressman James McGovern, thank you for all the work you do down in Washington, D.C., for all the people of the 2nd Congressional District. It's been great having you with us today, and look forward to seeing you next time.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir. And that's all for us. Have a good day.